When I listen back to client sales calls, I'm trying to help the sales team out. It's the same thing that I keep hearing. And it's two major things. And if you actually listen back to your own calls and you stop doing these and you recognize when you're doing them, it will change your sales game. So the first one is, I call it lily pad sales. So what is lily pad sales? What lily pad sales is, a prospect will answer your question. And what you'll do is, you won't take that information and dig down into what they've given you. You won't run with it. What you'll do is, you'll ask another question which is totally irrelevant. When they give us a bit of information around a potential problem, we have to take that information and dig down. We have to ask them, can you give me an example of that? How long have you been dealing with that for? What other areas is that impacting within the business? Why have you not solved this before? What have you already tried to get this solved? When you don't ask these follow-up questions, you stay on the surface. That's why I call it lily pad sales. You stay on the surface. And after 3, 4, 100% by 5 of these surface level questions, which don't get deep into the problems and deep into what you're trying to solve together, the prospect's turned off. They're bored. If they're polite, they'll be kind. If they're not polite, they just cut you off and tell you they're not interested. It really depends on the prospect. But you've turned the prospect off because your questions aren't moving towards the sale. And the only way to move towards the big yes, the sale, is to uncover the problems today, the impact they're having. Why haven't they been able to solve them? Where do they want to get to? How is this affecting their business? How is this affecting them? How is this affecting their team? How is this affecting their life? How much is this costing them? What internal beliefs do they have around the reason they can't get this solved? These types of discoveries is what you will find in a masterful discovery. This is what a discovery call is for. But you'll be really surprised if you listen back to sales calls, you listen back to your own sales calls, you'll realize that you never actually go to that depth where you get answers to those questions that move the sale forward. You will get an answer and you ask another question, which is a surface level question. I call it a fact question. You know, they may say, we've had a lack of investment within our technology, within the sales organization. And you might say, okay, well, how many sales guys have you got? They may say, you know, we've been running ads and we haven't seen the results that we've liked. Okay, well, are you currently doing any cold calling? You see how there's no connection there. But if you take that back, we haven't actually had an investment within our sales technology for a while. Okay, tell me more about that. And how is that impacting the day-to-day? And for example, you know, we're not seeing the results on our ads. Instead of asking about cold calling, you're asking them, what does that look like? Give me some numbers. We're really trying to get deeper and we're trying to cement ourselves as someone who cares and a potential provider to solve the problem. If we just stay on the surface, like I said, we never get to that depth that we need in the sales process. Without depth, the prospect won't buy, they get turned off, they ghost you, they won't book meetings, they disappear, they won't close. All of these things which are part of the sales game, but we want to reduce them as much as we can. And we do that by becoming memorable for the prospect, for allowing our questions, for the prospect to self-discover from the questions that we ask. And how do we do that? It's super simple. You don't have to be a master. You just have to ask. Can you tell me more about that? Can you give me an example? How long have you been dealing with that? How much has this been costing you? Why haven't you tried to solve this before? What sort of impact is this having on the business? How is this making you feel emotionally? Is this stressing you out? If this is stressing you out so much, why haven't you solved this before? You see these follow-up questions. That's what we want to do. So remember, don't stay on the surface, dig down, and it doesn't matter how deep you are into the sale. If you ask an irrelevant question, which is surface level, you go all the way back up, and all of that work you've done to bring you and your prospect together deep into the sales process, it's gone. So one way I actually like to track this is every time you ask a question, a sales related question, you write a Q1, then you write your question. Then you listen to the prospect's answer. Then you write Q2. And you look at that next question and you say, was that question related to what they told me? Did I bring depth into this sales call? Did that question bring depth and lead us downwards? Did that question start to uncover the problem, the root causes, the impact, the emotions, the internal beliefs? Or did it just keep us at the surface? And when you actually start to see that, you'll start to realize, wow, I asked a lot of questions which actually didn't move the sale forward. And then you'll start to see, what questions do I ask that get the best results? And you pepper them in to your sales process. And then eventually you'll be able to sell with less time because you ask higher impactful questions. So that's the first one. Lily pad sales, stay away from it. Get stuck in and get deep into the question and get deep into the sales process. All right, so second one is completely related. The second one is pushing your agenda on the prospect. We have to understand that sales is a yin and it's a yang, okay? Sales is a yin and a yang. You push your agenda on the prospect because the conversation is moving in a direction that you don't like. And a lot of times you do have to shape and you do have to re-steer the conversation. Remember, you're leading the sales journey. You're the ship captain and they're joining you on the sales journey. But that's why I say sales is a yin and a yang, because you can't push the prospect in the direction that you want them to go. You can't drag them through the sales process. They have to join you. And with your questioning, you can redirect the conversation. You can pull the prospect. You can push the prospect to go where you want them to go. And what this sounds like when you push your agenda is they will tell you something and you will just start telling them about your product and your service. It's called premature pitching. So why do we premature pitch? Why do we just tell them, Mr. Prospect, these are the people these are traditionally the people. So how does it actually sound like? What this sounds like is a prospect will be telling you something and you haven't heard what you've wanted to hear yet. And you'll just start talking about your product and your service, talking about the problems. Mr. Prospect, do you have this problem? Oh, Mr. Prospect, normally the people that we deal with, they have this problem, and this problem. That's why we do this. Mr. Prospect, do you know about this, and that? Do you actually have that problem at the moment? Because if you have this problem, this solution is perfect. You're pushing your agenda onto them. And it happens because they've said something that you don't anticipate in hearing, or it's gone in a direction that you don't know how to re-steer. So how do you actually solve that? What you have to do is, instead of doing a full 50-degree turn, and sometimes you do, if the prospect's yapping, you have to say, Dave, obviously a bit more polite than this, Dave, that's really interesting, mate, but I really want to know about, your marketing ad spend. Sometimes you do have to do that. It does happen. And if that's happened, that's for another reason. But sometimes you just have to ask a question, ask another question, go another question, and you're slowly moving into the direction that you want to go. And what does that do? It keeps the trust, because if you ask a question which is set up for you to hear, if you ask a question which is completely irrelevant, which just sounds like you're pushing your agenda onto your prospect, you lose trust. And that links to the first one, because you're not actually working with what they've given you. You're not in this flow, this yin and yang. You're pushing them, or you're pulling them through the sales conversation. And that doesn't work. People won't buy. You get a lot of objections. That's why one of the best things I've seen within the sales market today is breaking down your sales calls, every single one. If you follow a script, whatever you do, into frames, into sections, and you don't move on to the next section until you've got that buy-in. I call it the mini yes. Remember, sales is a big yes. We need the prospect to give us a mini yes, a mini yes, a mini yes, a mini yes, a mini yes. It's that yin and that yang. And if the prospect hasn't given us something that we want to hear, and we just start pushing our agenda, we just start talking about our product, we start talking about our service, they'll feel that. They'll feel that you're not present, that you're just there to push your agenda, you don't actually care about their problems, and they won't buy. That's why you have to learn how to ask questions that give you the answers and the information you want to hear. You should never tell a prospect what you want them to hear. You should always allow the prospect to tell you what you want to hear. So that's why I say you can't push your agenda on the prospect. You have to learn to redirect the sales conversation. You still have to have frame control, but you have to actually get to the direction that you want to go. So those are the two themes. What you have to do is you have to understand that in a discovery we need to go under the surface. So we need to actively listen and continue to work on what the prospect gives us. And the second thing is we can't push our agenda onto the prospect. Just let go of any sort of bias around where the conversation should go. Learn through questioning, through presence, through understanding how to direct the conversation and get the prospect to self-discover, self-believe, and get the prospect to self-discover and start telling you what you want to hear. And you only do that. You only do those two by becoming a master of discovery. So discovery questions are super, super important in sales. Probably the most important, even though people don't believe it today. I do believe that a masterful discovery is a make or break in the sales process. So listen back to your calls, start to understand, am I pushing my agenda on the prospect? Am I pushing them in the direction that I want them to go? Or are we sort of flowing? Thank you very much.